All right, welcome to Friday. So I saw this meme the other day on Reddit, and I thought that was amusing considering what we were talking about. For me, it's backwards, right? Like, and for I think for a lot of you, after we talked about how Google gives away all of this free stuff so that they can, sell you basically. They can sell your data to advertisers. It's kind of the other way around. Like, oh, look at all this cool free stuff. Oh, look, the college gives us free email using Gmail, and then you realize that it's just all, they can spy on you, right? Maybe you knew that already, but, you know. Uh, One thing in that regard that I do want to mention is that Microsoft, at least will pay you for it. So if you use Bing, does anyone here use Bing as their search engine? I use DuckDuckGo because DuckDuckGo respects your privacy. Um, so I use DuckDuckGo. But Bing is Microsoft's search engine. Does anyone here use it? Can you guys hear me? We got 10 people live right now. Nobody uses it. It's got a lot of, like, there's a couple things I like about Bing. First of all, the backgrounds are actually really pretty. They come up with really nice backgrounds. Um, News stories down here. But the cool thing is really. The cool thing is that they spy on you. Wait, that's not cool. Wait, it is, because they actually pay you. So if you use Bing as your search engine, they pay you like $5 a month. So, you know, uh, to me, that's almost kind of ethical. It's like, hey, we're gonna sell your search results and advertise to you, but you get a free $5, Starbucks card a month or something. And that's not like I was using it even like very hardcore. Like just occasional usage was enough for Microsoft to get me a $5 Starbucks. They would buy me a coffee once a month, and I'm like, that's I don't know. Like to me, that seems almost reasonable. Since then I've just moved to using DuckDuckGo, full time. But yeah, I mean the fact that Microsoft's like, look, we'll cut you in, on the money we make off you. I don't know. It seems. What do you think? Do you think that's still unethical for them to sell that you're searching for, whatever it is you're searching for? They build a profile on you, figure out what you like, target ads to you. Still seems like a one-sided agreement. Nah, you have to. Um, well, sort of, yeah. They're going to spy on you no matter what. But if you sign up for the Bing Rewards program, then they pay you at least. So, and I think the design of that is to try to, bribe you not to use Google, right? So, coffee sounds good right now. Yeah, I got myself a coffee right here. Good to go. So, does anyone else have any ideas on that? Like, is it reasonable? Are you still worried about your privacy? Do you not care about your privacy? Because a lot of people these days have taken a sort of fatalistic attitude towards privacy, which is that, yeah, everything I do is being spied on. Every communication I do is being spied on. There's nothing you can do about it. So just who cares? Um, Anyone? Yeah, we got 16 people on the stream right now. Anyone else have any ideas on privacy? It's probably one of the biggest topics right now, in society as far as technology goes. Guitar's falling over. Uh, California passed a privacy law that says, they can't collect this and that without your consent. They do anyway, but at least in theory, we have a law to prevent it. What do you think? Go on. This is a critical thinking class, people. Post your ideas. What do you care about your privacy? How much do you care about your privacy? If you're watching the recording at home, post. Is it all just a waste of time trying to care about your privacy? Is it something you care a lot about? Let's hear your opinions here. I'm not moving on with lecture till I get a couple more responses at least. What do you mean by not really just based on your opinion, Chase? Really? EFF? Really EFF? Okay. I don't care much because I'm not hiding anything. Yeah, I've heard that a lot. Only people who have something to hide care about privacy. Um, what's the question? I got kicked out of the call. The question is, how much value do you place on privacy? And some people, like I said, just have a very fatalistic attitude. Just like every text I send is going to be spied on, so who cares? I got nothing to hide. I don't care much. I don't hide anything. It doesn't matter a lot to me anyway. If you've been on the internet this long, since your privacy is out there, no point in trying to protect it. Everyone's watching us anyway. Might as well let them spy. Yeah, it's a fairly common attitude. The trouble with the attitude of like, I've got nothing to hide, is that well, first of all, there's Cardinal Richelieu, right? And Cardinal Richelieu said, if you give me 6 lines written by the hand of the most honest of men, I will find something in them with which to hang them. So the more of your stuff you have out there, the more opportunities people have to misunderstand you, to cancel you, would be the equivalent of Cardinal Richelieu's line now, right? So I don't feel much. I have nothing to hide. I'm also like no one special. Um, the the more of your stuff you have out there, the more opportunities the government has to match something with what you said to, a terrorist or something like that. You get on a watch list, then you try flying and you can't fly, and they won't tell you why. You're just on a watch list. Why? We can't tell you. What did I say? We can't tell you. How do I get off it? We can't tell you. How do I fly it? You can't. So I would love to have my privacy, but every little thing is watching it. It's hard to keep up with it. Yeah. So that's really the problem though with just saying like I don't really care about privacy, is because it creates more opportunities for misunderstandings even. Okay. So let's continue on with that. And it doesn't help, right, that the college itself uses Gmail, right, like as the official email system. And it doesn't help that Google's everywhere. If you search for something on your cell phone, it's Google. It tracks you. It's deeply embedded into a lot of our just ecosystem. And I agree. Like it's like if you look at the extent to which people like Richard Stallman or that friend of my friend that I was telling you about would go to in order to preserve their privacy, it's ridiculous. Like you can't call them, and like I want people to be able to call me, like if my daughter gets hurt at school, I want you to be able to call me. You know what I mean? Like, but simply by registering my daughter at school and the person at after school program has entered my name into their cell phone, that's now in Google's database. So, yeah, it's a really, really big issue. And so, the government has done some. I don't think it's just for people who are afraid of something. Privacy is important. Yeah, and getting advertised to isn't the worst thing in the world. It's like if I search on, Google for like I don't know, like diapers or something. It's like, you know, it's convenient to be able to have the ability to just click on these things, and you know, it's not it's not the end of the world. It's not like I'm getting thrown in the gulag or something. You know what I mean? But all that data is out there, and did I go to the NSA one? Yeah, and then the NSA and other governmental agencies that have three letters in them, they scoop up all of this data on the internet, and they have these massive data centers, like the the Utah data center cost $1.5 billion. And that's your taxpayer money, by the way. And this is your money, that is used to spy on you and the world. I mean, let's be fair. They spy on everyone, right? And this is just one of them, right? And the data center has the capability that critics believe, obviously the NSA won't say anything, has the capability to process all forms of communication, contents of private emails, cell phone calls, internet searches, all types of personal data trails, parking receipts, travel itineraries, bookstore purchases, and other stuff. In response to the claims the data center would be used to illegally monitor email of U.S. citizens in April 2013, many unfounded allegations have been made about the planned activities. One of the biggest is that we're unlawfully listening on or reading emails of the U.S. citizens. This is simply not the case. Of course, they're saying unlawfully listening in on. They didn't say if they're lawfully doing it, because they have several fig leaves that they can use, where if they intercept a U.S. citizen's email and record it, they don't have to delete it. They simply mask the data, which means they still have the data, but they just, when you search for it, the name is like blanked out. And if somebody wants to unmask the data, they click a button and then the name appears. And so, yeah, they're completely, spying on people, as far as anyone knows. Like, who knows, right? And that was a big part of the Edward Snowden revelations a while back, which was just how bad the problem was, right? And so... Utah actually moved to like cut off their water access because of the fact that the people didn't like it. Okay, and so in California we have this thing called the California Customer Privacy Act. That a year ago I went through a number of companies' websites to see if they were following it, and they're not. Even companies based here in California. We could probably do that exercise again at some point. But I want to get to racism. So this is a pretty big topic, and switch gears and get into racism. So racism is a really big issue, right? And you're right, like, why are we talking about this in computer science? Well, remember last time how we talked about like how facial recognition had different accuracy rates based on people's skin color, right? And so one of the important things when talking about racism is to go into the definition of racism, and I think this is something that bugs me that people don't do enough. Like we talk about things like social justice without talking about what justice means. We talk about the ethics of computer science, and by we I don't mean our class, because I'm teaching this class, but like we computer science professors will teach ethics of computer science and not talk about what ethics are. Like, they don't talk about the ethical frameworks. And I went to a conference 2 weeks ago, and I sat in on a workshop, like a Birds of a Feather group, where we're talking about the ethics of computer science. And nobody, everybody was just using, like, these really, basic, utilitarian, they didn't, they didn't, say, under this framework, this would be wrong. Like, they just had these really vague, utilitarian views of, this will have a negative. And so, when it comes to racism, it's important to understand, especially now with all the, Black Lives Matters and all that stuff going on. And it's not just after, what was it, last summer? Like, everything's kind of vague now. These issues have been going on for a long time, right? And it's really important to understand that the left wing and the right wing use the term racism in different ways. And this is, to me, one of the biggest tragedies. Well, okay, I shouldn't say it's one of the biggest tragedies, but it's like, if you want to understand why people have such a hard time having a conversation about racism, it's because people use the term racism in radically different ways. And then they get mad when, like, the other person's like, that's not racist. What do you mean it's not racist? How dare you not, But it's, and that's why in this class, like, I talk about the ethical frameworks. I talk about what it means for something to be true. And so in this, we're going to talk about what racism means, okay? And so one is the belief of the superiority of a race over another. Obviously, the Nazis would be a great example of that. They believed in the superiority of the Aryan people, whatever the hell that means, over, like the Slavs, for example, over the Jews, right? Over the Roma, okay? And they saw their whole worldview was that, it's sort of like ethno superiority, right? Like, our peoples are better than your peoples, and so we're going to kill you and take your land to get more Lebensraum, more elbow room for the German peoples. Like, that's, like, you can't understand World War II unless you understand that was what was driving Hitler. It doesn't make sense for Hitler to have done a lot of the things if you don't understand the fact that he believed that their genetics were better than other people's genetics. Okay. Bullet point 2 is typically the definition used by Republicans and right-wing people, which is individual acts of prejudice and discrimination. If you don't hire somebody because they're black, that's racism. If you don't hire somebody because they're white, that's racism. If you don't hire somebody because they're Asian, that's racism. If you don't rent out your apartment to somebody because of their skin color, that's racism. Okay? And that's why you will see these radical disagreements, because the third bullet point is the one that is more common and becoming more common now in the left wing. You see, like, Van Jones on CNN and Biden, Kamala Harris, things like that. You've heard of talk of systemic racism. And so systemic racism is systems that produce unequal outcomes. So if you have a school that serves dark-skinned kids that produce tons and tons of dropouts and things like that, and then you have a school that serves light-skinned people and they have no dropouts, then that is systemic racism. You have two different schools serving people with different ethnicities and races, and they're having different outcomes. Some good, some bad. And that's systemic racism. And that might not be, there might not be like any individual acts of prejudice and discrimination you can point to. If you go to the school, the poor, oftentimes these are poor, inner city. I've worked at them. I've run after school programs for free at them. And I'm well aware with the problems. I went to one for middle school. Okay. My middle school was ranked not last, but one up from last in all of San Diego County. That's how bad my middle school was. It was really bad. Yeah. So, like, it's a thing, right? And so, but like when you're there, you don't see the teachers being like, using the N-word or anything like that. It's just systemically, these schools have issues, and they do, and so it's, in my opinion, it's good for us to talk about that. But when people confuse these two things, like, it causes a lot of problems. It's like, to a right-wing person, it's like, that's not racist. That, nobody at the school is like discriminating against people because of the color of their skin. They just have bad teachers or whatever, But then the left-wing person would say, well, yeah, but why are we putting the bad teachers in these schools, right? And the right-wing person says, because the good teachers don't want to work there, which is also true. Left-wing people say, all right, let's offer more money to teach there. And the right-wing people say, we do. We offer a $20,000 to $30,000 bonus to teach in these inner city schools. And there's this back and forth between it. But if you don't understand these different definitions, then, like, you will tend to get very upset. Like, why do you not understand that this is racist, And that's one of the important things, I think, in this class, is that I'm trying to teach people that people from other viewpoints aren't evil. Some of them are, obviously. But, like, just because somebody has a different viewpoint doesn't mean they're the devil, that they're evil, right? People have their own definitions, and under that definition system, they have a different viewpoint. And if you understand somebody else's viewpoint, you don't get upset. You're just like, oh, I see, you're using that definition. Okay, let me come to some common ground that we can find there. Because I think everybody agrees that inner city schools are a problem, right? Right wing, left wing, it doesn't matter. Like we all agree there's a problem there. It's just the terminology we use and the interventions we should do and things like that are different. Okay, and there can be overlap, like because sometimes it is, it is all of them, right, or two of them, right? So Yale Medical School, obviously one of the top schools in the world, had a policy for decades that said never admit more than 5 Jews, 2 Italians, and no blacks. Right? That was their official policy. Okay? And so is that based on the belief of the superiority of one race over another? Yep. If you're white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, no problem. Right? Because we're better than you, right? Individual acts of prejudice is discrimination. Yep. You're not hiring somebody because they're, you're not admitting somebody to your school because they're Italian or because they're Jewish or because they're black. That's individual acts of discrimination. Absolutely. Right-wing people would say that's wrong. And then left-wing people, are you creating a system that will have unequal outcomes? Yep. It's racist under that system too. So it's not like these things are always in like conflict with each other. Sometimes acts, like everybody agrees, like, yep, that's racist, that's wrong, And what's really scary is how long that system lasted. Yale's racial quota lasted through the 1960s, right? And this is an ancient history, right? Like through the 60s. And California, the University of California, had a lawsuit, Bakke versus Board of Education, famous lawsuit, which ended racial quotas as unconstitutional. And that was 1978. That was after I was born. Okay. I was born in 77. So, and they're coming back, and this is something that I think we need to think more about, which is like Governor Newsom has started reintroducing quotas and like boards of governors and things like that for women and then other underrepresented groups. Okay, so if you're a large corporation, 30% of your board of directors has to come from an underrepresented group. I'm surprised this hasn't been challenged in court. I'm not sure it would hold up under a lawsuit. But there's been there was a big push to bring back racial quotas. It was in the last election. There was a proposition here in California to bring back the quota system, and it failed, which was interesting, because California is a fairly blue state, and the proposition failed pretty badly. So let me minimize my face a little bit. Okay, so racism. One of the things about racism is that when we talk about races of humans, that itself is racist, and that makes talking about racism tricky. Like you've heard me use the term skin color, right? And I prefer that over the term race. And the reason for that is because a race in biology means a genetically distinct group, right? Like you have this race of animal versus this one, and they're sort of isolated gene pools. And in humans, there is some correlation between country of origin and your genetics. For example, sickle cell anemia, which is an adaptation against malaria. It's more prevalent in areas that have malaria. If you get 2 of them, it's a maladaptation. There are some geographical distribution differences in humans. It's fairly minor though, and it's not enough to rise to the level of calling it a race. And so calling it a race means you're buying into the concept that, this group of people are different from us, right? And when you have a different group than us, remember what we talked about last time with in-group bias, right? Or 2 times ago about in-group bias. When they're a different group, that's their group and it's our group, that causes problems. And so just the term racism is racist because it came about through racist science, where they sort of categorize humanity according to the 5 color system, right? So you have white, yellow, red, brown, and black, and that the whole notion of that was to prove the superiority of the white man, right? And so the whole terminology system we use in racism is racist, and it's ridiculous to me that we haven't tried to not use these scientific racist, systems, right? The UN has a statement on it saying all humans belong to a single species and are descended from a common stock. They're born equal in dignity and rights and all form an integral part of humanity. Right? So there are no races in humanity. We just use that word because we've been using the word. Right? It's just an old word. There's also ethnicity. Ethnicity is different from race. That's not always true. Like, it depends on the country you're talking about. The United Kingdom uses race and ethnicity sort of interchangeably. In America, though, it's a different checkbox, right? So, well, like when you do the U.S. Census or something like that, they will have a checkbox for ethnicity and they'll have a checkbox for race. And the difference is race is your color of skin, essentially. And ethnicity is your country of origin for your parents and your parents' parents and things like that. And there's only one ethnicity that we recognize in America, which is odd, right? But that is people whose ancestors ultimately come from Spain. And so you're either Hispanic or you're not Hispanic on the census, right? Just kind of an odd system also, but that's how it is. And so you can be a white Hispanic, you can be a black Hispanic, right? So if you go to like the Caribbean, there's a lot of black Hispanic people, right? Afro-Cuban music, I used to listen to a lot, and you know, it's a different categorization system. And again, I think it's kind of odd. You know what I mean? Like we don't care about people being from China, Japan, Thailand, India. Nope. Okay. All right. It's just we do it because we do it. You know, this system has been in place for a long time, and so that's the one ethnicity. You're either Hispanic or non-Hispanic in America. And like I said, in the UK, ethnicity is part of race in their checkbox. It's all just one system. And so countries have different categorization systems. That's important to know also. And how we categorize people also has changed over the years. Like, what does it mean to be white? Has shifted a lot, by the way. So, and there's dead silence on Discord for the past 19 minutes. Feel free to post things, please. So, like, whiteness, the concept of whiteness has changed over the years, right? It originally basically just meant white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, right? So Italians, Jews would not be considered white. Irish people, you know. And so over the years, though, the concept of whiteness has expanded. And, you know, the new thing is categorizing Asian people as white, which is, you know, kind of a trend that I've noticed over the last couple of years. Is that, you know, websites will say white or Asian, or just include Asian people into white, the white category, which is a pretty important demographic shift if you're going to start categorizing it that way. I do agree that we only recognize Hispanic for US. Yeah, you know, anytime you have like a job form or something like that, they'll typically have those checkboxes. I always get confused by the terms ethnicity and race. Yeah, me too. Like, I took a thing at Duke a year ago on 4 computer science professors on race and ethnicity. I'm like, oh, that makes sense. And they said they said this was, you know, just what the terms mean, you know, color of skin versus country of origin. But then I kind of looked it up. I'm like, no, that's just in the U.S. Because in other, you know, and so anytime you study anything related to these topics, you need to like actually like don't just believe me, you know, like find out what does the United Nations say, what is the definition of words in other countries, because that gives you perspective in it as well. Middle Eastern are considered white. That's also true. And so one of the pushes recently is to have a MENA category, which is Middle East North African. And so that, you know, there's an article I read where they're trying to push for that being a separate category for like college admissions and things like that. Because, yeah, if you're Middle Eastern, that counts as white. And, yeah. It's just why, you know, like I don't know if there's any rhyme or reason to like a lot of this stuff. It just is, you know. And does that make it immune to criticism? No, it doesn't. You can you are more than welcome to criticize how we categorize race and ethnicity. I'm just telling you how our current system is, and it kind of baffles me as well why it is that way. So if Asians are considered white, how does that work for colored people in Southeast Asia? You got me. like I said, like the whole categorization system itself is problematic. You know what I mean? But you need, you also have to do it because if like everyone's just humans, then you can't talk about racism, right? And so it's like it's this really sticky issue that just is the terminology we use is troubling, and what else, what other terminology do we have? We don't have any alternatives, so I personally just use the term skin color, right? And because I mean, if you look at the actual genetics, that's mostly what it boils down to, right? And do people discriminate against people based on their skin color? Yes, they do. Not everyone, but enough that it's a problem in America. Do you look at schools have different outcomes based on skin color? Yes. Is that a problem? Yes, it is. It's a very big problem. And that I worked in education for over 12 years. I volunteered at a very poor performing school for that reason. Because it bothers me. Because like I said, I went to a middle school that was that bad. And so I went back to that neighborhood and volunteered there, to help, Like it's something that really, I care a lot about, But the whole categorization system is just, yeah. And so, white Hispanic is, it's not a contradiction, right? A lot of times in the demographics, what they'll do is they'll split the white category into white non-Hispanic and white Hispanic, when they do the reports and things like that. But yeah, those are two different categories. Part Spaniard, part Mexican. I definitely noticed this, especially recently. Yeah. So the good news, because like one of the things about racism is very depressing to talk about. Like if you saw the murder of George Floyd, like it is horrific. If you saw the audio recording, if you listened to the audio recording of Philando Castile after he'd been shot by a cop, it is the most heartbreaking thing like you can imagine, right? Philando Castile, of course, was pulled over by a cop. He notifies the cop, "Hey, just so you know, I have a gun on me," and the cop's like, "Okay." And then when he goes to reach for his ID, the cop shoots him 5 times and kills him. And as he's dying, his girlfriend and his kid are in the car with him. It is absolutely heartbreaking. It's really easy to get depressed when talking about these things. There is some good news, though. And the good news is, look at the poll results. This is from the University of Illinois. And they track racist attitudes over time. And look at it. Like, it's actually very encouraging, right? Like, it's actually very good news. Like, what we have here is, should white people and black people go to the same school? So, the way the question's phrased. It only considers two races, two skin colors, I should say, because that's a problem, by the way, when it comes to race and ethnicity, is that they oftentimes only consider white and black, and Hispanic issues get erased, Asian issues get erased, Native American issues get erased, because it's, those are the only two, right? Very frustrating. So the way the questions respond, I think, is between should white and black kids go to the same school? And you can see it was 30% in 1940, right? And it got so high by 95 that they just stopped asking the question, right? So, over the span of 60 years, it went from being a strong majority saying no, schools should not be integrated, to now saying, yeah, of course they should be. It's all too common. Feels like cops are just trained to kill rather than de-escalate. Yeah, and I don't know if that cop actually was found guilty. I don't think he was in that case, which is really horrifying. The guy who noted, like he said, like, just so you know, a gun on me. Terrible. So laws against interracial marriage. You can see here support. This is yeah. So basically, you had 35% opposing. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, it's not support for, it's opposition to. So you had 35% of people opposing laws against interracial marriage, and it got up to about 90% by 2000. Same thing, stopped asking the question. And then people who themselves personally would engage in an interracial marriage was around 5% in 1960, which is a really low number. Like That's really bad, if you're thinking about it, right? Um, and what's also really interesting to me is that even though only like 15% of Americans would say, yeah, I would marry somebody of a different race, in the same year, you have 40% saying, yeah, there should be no law against it. So Americans are always suspicious of government and laws. And so this is actually, do you see the difference between the yellow and the blue? So even though I personally, believe this, should the government regulate it? No, is what Americans are saying here. That there's always been this gap between like personal morality and like what the government should enforce. It's quite interesting, right? And so this hit 90% around, like 10 years ago. So, but it's good news, is what I'm trying to say. It's actually good news. And there's some people that say you can't mention good news because then people won't take it seriously. I don't agree. I think everybody thinks this is a serious problem in our society. And I think if you don't show data, like what kind of person are you that like, oh, you can't show the facts? Like that bugs me, And so there is good news. Like Americans that are becoming notably less racist over the years. It's an odd argument. Seeing good news is good. I know, right? But like, yeah, they say like, look, if you present good news, then you're trying to say there is no race. Like racism's over. Like I think it's what they're worried about. And I don't know anybody that thinks racism is like I shouldn't say that, but that you're like trying to minimize the problems. And I don't know anybody that personally, like you can watch people on TV or Twitter all day long, but personally I don't know anybody that's like, yeah, not a serious issue. So on TV, Twitter, sure, I'm sure you can find people that say any sort of dumb thing. All right, so stereotypes have gotten a lot better as well. They used to be like whites are richer, which is actually true. What's interesting is that over the years, less people are willing to say that, though, right? If you look at the median income of white versus black Americans, median income is higher, right? And so basically, this question was asked. This isn't a sign of racism. It's like, are people willing to say it, right? And so it's gone down by like 12% a little bit, as people don't want to admit it, But these notions that whites work harder or are more intelligent have markedly decreased over the years, right? So people start seeing, that there's issues, right? Blacks being treated unfairly in various settings. African American respondents are these, white is these, and this is a very interesting graph to me. So, are you discriminated against by the popo, right? If you like, every black person I've talked to has had a bad encounter with the police at some point, right? Like a friend of mine, I played Borderlands with him all the time. He was driving to his college, gets pulled over just randomly, not breaking the law, just randomly pulled over in Vegas by a cop, and then cop's like, "What you up to?" And he's like, "I'm just going to class. I'm a UNLV student." He's like, "Oh, you're a UNLV student? Carry on then." Like, really? Yeah. And so this is 75% of black people, or African Americans, however you want to put it. And then what's really interesting is that white people only say it's a problem for African Americans. This isn't asking, have you been unfairly treated, or whites unfairly treated. This is asking, are blacks unfairly treated by the police? And there is a marked difference between African American and white respondents, right? And that's a interesting result. And and then you can also break it down by on the job, in restaurants, things like that. So that's something to think about, right? Because if you don't see it, doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, right? You got to talk to people and find out their stories. Okay, and look at stats too. Like, just talking to people isn't good enough. You have to dig into the stats as well. Okay, so, well, if you think about America's existence based on race, so it always has been. So, black and white fallacy, in this case, is to do like what the University of Illinois did there, and to just only consider that two races exist, which is a big problem, right? It cost a large grant, a $3 million grant that I wrote for the city of Calexico. Calexico is on the border of Mexico, obviously very, very large Hispanic population, right? Calexico, across the border of Calexico is Mexicali. So you have Mexico, California, Mexicali, and then on the California side it's Cali, California, Mexico, Calexico. It's clever. It's clever. It's a clever naming system. So you have Calexico and Mexicali right next to each other on the border in Imperial Valley. And I wrote a grant. And the grant said, you have to talk about underserved minorities. And the grant was about literacy programs in a district that's 99% Hispanic, 86% low income, 65% English learners, which means they're not fluent in English. The whole point of the grant was to do interventions that would bring their English literacy levels up. That was the entire point of the grant. And one of the readers gave us a 0 on it, essentially, because we didn't talk about underserved minorities. And I sat there going like, did you read my grant? Do you, what? Like, what the hell? Because that's, the entire point of the grant. The entire point, and I realized, like, oh, they're from the East Coast. And people from the East Coast think of these terms only in terms of black and white, right? And they were upset that I didn't talk about black people in the district. And it's 99% Hispanic. I don't know what to tell you. You know what I mean? And this isn't like some like hypothetical situation. This actually happened to me, and this meant that these schools in Calexico, which really needed the money, didn't get it. So this isn't like some like my paper didn't get accepted by a conference. No, this is $3 million that was desperately needed, that didn't go to the people that needed it because this person used a black and white fallacy. Okay. Other examples of the black and white fallacy would be the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which ended in 1950. It was not ancient history. Chinese Exclusion Act basically limited immigration very heavily out of China. Pushed forward by a guy named Kearney, actually, to no relation. They had a gentleman's agreement with Japan to reduce immigration from Japan into America. One of the things that actually angered Japan that led to World War II was the fact that they went to when the League of Nations was founded. Japan said, hey, we should have something in the League of Nations. You guys know what the League of Nations is. It was like the previous iteration of the United Nations, right? That didn't work very well. And so Japan went to the formation of the League of Nations and said, we should have something in here that racism is bad, right? That you can't discriminate against people because of their race. And do you know which country vetoed this? Anyone? Anyone want to take a wild guess? Who vetoed Japan's quite progressive, because Japan was being discriminated against, right? They couldn't send people to other countries. And so they're like, hey, look, we should have a clause in here. You can't discriminate based on race. Nowadays, it'd be fairly, except we still kind of do with immigration policies, right? It's based on country of origin. It's not race, it's ethnicity. But anyone want to guess which country vetoed this, leading to Japan not really being very interested in the League of Nations and leading to World War II? Hiroshima and Nagasaki? Direct result of this. Anyone? No? U.S.? Nope. It's not always the U.S. It's not always the U.S. We're not always the bad guys here. It was Australia, if I'm remembering correctly. Australia was quite racist at the time. They had what's called the White Australia policy. And, yep, Australia. Super racist. Yep. And, yeah, we're not always the bad guys. In this case, it was Australia. So, you probably haven't heard that before, huh? We're not always the bad guys. It's true. We're not always the bad guys. And Japan, was pretty racist against, China. There's problems all around the world. It's not just America. Yeah. Yeah. You never have guessed it? Yeah. Super racist. So, like, Australia for the Australians, right? White Australia. It was a big, big thing. And White Australia policy lasted until 1973 in forms. Not ancient history. America, of course, the most famous discrimination against Japanese people would be Japanese internment, which affected us here in the Central Valley very strongly. If you go to the bonsai garden at the Japanese gardens, you will find very few bonsai from before World War II. Why? Because all of them died when the people were interned. Yeah, so almost all the bonsai you see there are post-World War II. There's very few from prior to World War II. Fred Korematsu, of course, sued over Japanese internment and lost. The Supreme Court said, no, you can just round people up based on their ethnicity and throw them in jail. That's fine. Go America, land of the free. And Fred Korematsu was actually involved in the civil rights movements in the 60s, actually. He was actually involved with civil rights the rest of his life. Kind of on, not as famous for that as for that. So, yeah, there's some famous stories. We actually talked about this at the SIGC conference a couple weeks ago. There's a system called Compass. It's an AI system that identifies basically who should get paroled, right? And sentencing and things like that. No, it's not paroling, it's sentencing guidelines. And so basically a judge can run a program and you type in the stats of the defendant. The person was just found guilty of shoplifting or whatever. You type in their stats and it says send them to jail for 10 years. Type in another person, send them to jail for 1 year. Right? It's an AI system that is used to determine how long people should be in prison, which is terrifying. It's not open source. You cannot examine the source code, but it will still result in you being behind bars for 9 more years if it has a glitch in it. And who knows if it has a glitch in it or not. It's defended by the fact that it's just advisory. A judge doesn't have to use it, but oftentimes they do. Right? It's used to predict who's going to come out of jail and commit a crime more often. And so basically black defendants are more likely to be classified as high risk than white defendants, even after you control for all other factors. And Hispanics are also more likely to be flagged as being a high risk person. Facial recognition we've talked about. Facebook's ad system allows you to do housing discrimination. You can say just advertise my apartment complex to people that have the right skin color. Trump, of course, sued them, which who would have saw that coming, right? But I mean, Trump also wasn't a very big fan of Facebook, so I don't know. Maybe that's something to do with that. Algorithms are used to approve mortgages, student loans, resumes, promoting, firing, advertising. AI can be biased in all of these, and you have to be very careful that your code is not doing disparate impact, is what it's called. That if you take all this, if you have 2 people that are equivalent, but one's white, one's black, make sure that the AI doesn't say no, you don't get a mortgage, right? But you do, right? And so a friend of mine, the friend of mine who actually just died a few months ago, or no, last month, I guess, at this point. He worked for Fannie Mae on the software that would approve purchasing mortgages from banks. And so we've had the Fair Housing Act since the 60s, and banks are not supposed to engage in housing discrimination based on your race. Some do, but you're not supposed to, and there's hundreds of lawsuits a year on these targets, so they're actually pretty careful about it. And so what Fannie Mae did was, one of the things they did was every time they updated their software, they had to run a test on it to see if it had disparate impact on people based on their race, and this is also something that when I went to this thing at Duke a year ago, they didn't know about that. They said, yeah, the software discriminates people based on their race, and I'm like, I didn't say anything because I'm not going to get into an argument with them, but no, they've been doing this for a long time. Where if they update their software, they have to see if it has disparate impact based on race, and it has not for a long time. So, like I said, it's not all bad news. It's not all bad news. And I agree that you need to focus on the good things as well. If a company does something good, then I think that you should give them credit for it. And so Fannie Mae, if it had disparate impact, they would just randomly change some of the variables and run it again. And if it still has disparate impact, they just randomly change some of the variables. Let's make this factor a little more important, and they would just sort of randomly, change things in a software program that processes billions of dollars of loans a year until it has no disparate impact. And there you go. So that to me is terrifying, but there you go. So that is our talk on computer science and racism. The main takeaway point here is that when you work in computer science, or even if you don't work in computer science, because this class has a lot of non-majors in it, and it's for you too, make sure that, let's say you do marketing, right? If you do marketing, and you're advertising housing, make sure that your housing advertisements aren't targeting one race, or not targeting one race, if you know what I mean. Yep. It's something to think about. Like every time, you work for a company, if you work for Tesla, and you're working on the autopilot system, make sure that it can recognize pedestrians with different skin colors. You know what I mean? Like, don't be one of those people that are like, oh, we just didn't think about it. And then people get run over and die. Right? It's just something, it's just something to think about as you go forward and get a job, and just keep it in the back of your head. Like, we should probably test this on people with different skin colors. And if you're working for a big data company that does data science, whatever, just think about it. That's all I'm really asking for you to do in this class, is just think about it. Just keep it in the back of your mind. And if you do that, I think our world will be a better place. So that's it for today. Any questions about the different computer science programs that were there's more than this, of course. It's a big topic. The definitions, the history, anything? Nobody wants to say anything? Okay, well, that's it for today then. So, peace out, and we will talk a little bit more about this on Monday, and then we'll move on to a new topic. All right, have a great weekend, everybody, and make sure you get your Fallacies treasure hunts done by Monday. It's a due date. All right, peace out, everyone.